typically a buyer can expect that the process will take a little longer than a normal transaction. They should expect that the property is still owned by the individual borrower and not by the bank. They should expect also that the property is not necessarily damaged but still in good condition, because most times the property is still occupied by the borrower. The right buyer for a short sale transaction would be one who is ready, willing, and able. Ready, meaning that the buyer is coming to the contract or coming to the table with a pre-approval letter or a pre-qualification letter that shows that they are able to buy, that they have the buying power, and that they are able to adhere to the terms of the contract. Willing, they should be willing to proceed with the transaction, understanding that it's going to require some patience. Most short sales take some time, 60 to 90 days on average to close. So it really requires the buyer to have an understanding of the process, armed with competent counsel who can walk them through step by step what's happening at any given point in time in the transaction. Able, the buyer should be able to proceed once the lender on the seller's side and the buyer's side determine that the file is clear to close. When the lender sets forth conditions that certain funds should be brought to the table, certain documentation be provided in order to close the transaction, the buyer should be able to close the transaction on the day and appointed time. A good team of competent professionals that are well versed in short sales. Your attorney is important, your realtor is important, and your loan officer. All of those individuals need to have sound knowledge with respect to short sales especially. A BPO, which is a broker price opinion, is usually the determining factor for the sale price. The broker price opinion is typically ordered by the lender, and it's conducted by a real estate agent. And they will look at comparable sales in the area to determine pricing with the lender's approval. The seller or the borrower has the ultimate decision-making authority. They accept the contract initially, but it must be reviewed and approved by their lender. The highest price doesn't always win. There's some other factors to take into consideration. One is whether or not the buyer has the availability of funds. Are the funds available right then and there, or will financing be necessary? Another thing to consider, whether or not the buyer is able to pay for any shortage. If the seller can't come up with the funds, will the buyer be willing and able to cover those costs? Another consideration, the time of closing. How long is this going to take to get to the closing table? That is of utmost importance because all parties want to close the deal. A short sale is different than a traditional real estate transaction, so it's important to consider that certain language needs to be in the contract. And there are certain addendums that are required to be attached to the contract, such as your short sale addendum, which references specific language that the borrower needs to understand, that the seller has to adhere to, and that the lender should be made aware of. So it's important to get your attorney involved at the very beginning to make sure that the contract is drafted properly and that it protects you as the buyer. The seller is obligated to provide disclosures to the buyer, and the buyer should absolutely sign off on disclosures prior to presenting an offer. One of the disclosures that's an absolute necessary is a radon disclosure. If the buyer is buying a single-family home or a condo up to 3 floors. Lead paint disclosures and residential real property disclosures are also requirements. Now this protects you as the buyer. You'll want to know and make an informed and educated decision about the property that you're purchasing. So make sure that you are reviewing these documents prior to presenting your offer. Now remember, a short sale is a great deal. It will save you a lot of money, and if you have the patience and you're armed with good counsel, it can be a dream come true. But make sure that you remember that the professionals that you have on your team, make sure that they're well versed in the short sale process. That's the key to a seamless transaction.